government to do their job, and if they don't do it, then Arizona will.
It's Arizona versus the federal government. The illegal immigration fight will end up in court. What both sides are saying about the lawsuit and the politics behind it. That's where we start with tonight's weekly and edgy panel. Joining me in the studio are James Hohmann with Politico, Amy Morris, co-host of the Federal Drive on Federal News Radio AM 1500, and Manuel Quinones from the Capital News Connection. So Arizona's getting its day in court to defend its immigration law. It's a battle between states' rights and the federal jurisdiction. A judge will hear the case just a week before the controversial legislation goes into effect. So what's on the table, James?
A judge could stay the law to allow a full hearing of the facts before making a decision or overturn it. A lot of analysts think that the Justice Department has a pretty strong case that they can invoke the Supremacy Clause to say that the federal government really has the right to enforce in this area. Another option would be to pass immigration legislation, which no one expects to happen, which would preempt that Arizona law, but that certainly won't happen.
Amy, we've talked before about how the Republicans, when they were in power, they couldn't get this done, that even the lawmakers who are out of office now have told me privately and publicly, Democrats don't want it because that's their voting base, part of it. Republicans don't want it because the big, rich Republican companies can get cheap help, and that was a Republican lawmaker who told me that. So where do we stand with this?
Well, the immigration reform is not going to go very far, and a lot is going to depend on how this lawsuit plays out. Depending on what the judge decides to do with the potential stay of this law, that could send up some red flags or green flags, depending on your point of view, as to where this is going to be headed. You need to watch and see how that is going to play out to see where immigration reform may fall down the line. But like you said, it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Manuel, there's been talk about having an MLB a boycott, baseball boycott. You've got Ken Cuccinelli in Virginia saying, hey, this is all hypocritical. Why are you bugging Virginia when you can't do your own job? Where do you weigh in on this?
Well, that's one of the reasons, all these protests and all these demonstrations are one of the reasons that President Obama is doing this in the first place, especially according to critics, is because they want that Hispanic vote in the midterm elections. And a lot of Hispanics, this is critical for them, and they see the congressional inaction as something horrible to them. And that's why the Democrats have been throwing morsels at them, and that's why another reason the Republicans have been stalling so much on the issue, because it's going to be so important before the midterm elections.
I think it's ironic that the federal government is saying that Arizona shouldn't take the right away from the federal government to enforce our immigration laws, where if they had been doing this all along, we wouldn't be in the situation that we are in today.
Manuel, the key difference, there's not that big of a difference between the Arizona law and the federal law. The key difference is in Arizona, they want every illegal immigrant caught and deported. The federal government says there's no way we can do that. Do you think there's any way to get some kind of resolution of this? The
only way to get resolution ultimately, and I think both sides can agree on this, is passing some sort of immigration bill in Congress. The problem is that you have Republicans coalescing around doing a border security first approach, and then you have Democrats saying that their comprehensive immigration reform effort, which includes a path to legalization, well, that will take care of the border security issues. And because of the politics of the issue, they don't seem to be able to merge.
When Republicans were in power, they couldn't get it done. Democrats can't get it done. Let's move on to another political subject, Amy Morris. And this is Governor Manchin in West Virginia. We've got the Senate seat of the late Robert Byrd open. Do you think he's going to somehow wiggle his way in because he doesn't want to, but you know, he's got to walk a fine tightrope here?
He absolutely has to walk a fine tightrope, and he actually has a shot at doing this. And I think, ironically, this actually ties into the issue of unemployment benefits and that extension, because lawmakers want to take that on as soon as they come back from their recess, and that's going to be the deciding vote, the 60 that they need to stop the filibuster. And that's one of the issues that we're watching to see how that plays out. It's a possibility.
Before we get too much inside baseball with that case, before this segment's up, I want to talk about this spy saga going on. The thing that everybody said, oh, it isn't there, but it's the big spy elephant in the room. We've got resolution to it. It's over with. It's ironic that a former Russian spy has died, who the wife said was the one that tipped off the U.S. that this was happening to begin with. James, is it the way we do business here is just to get the business done but not admit that anything ever happened?
I think that the administration doesn't want to wreck our relationship, which has gotten a lot better with Russia over the last 18 months on account of some sort of petty two-bit spies in New York who were trying to get invited to cocktail parties to learn what was going on in America.
They were far more valuable as to swap than they were for information, is my understanding.
You know, if I weren't this conspiracy nut, I would think that it looks as though that this recent roundup, including the 3 from Arlington, was done just so we could get our people out of Russia at this time. I mean, it's quid pro quo, as it turns out to be.
At least it shows that a lot of people were very surprised when this happened, and my reaction was, countries do this, and countries have been doing this for a very long time. We spent tens of billions of dollars in our intelligence network, and that's one reason that it wasn't that big a deal, at least, you know, from the Obama administration and the Russian authorities. It happens, and it got dealt with.
It came at a bad time, according to a Homeland Security official who had this comment to say. Listen.
Every time something happens, you know, people say, oh, you should step down, Well, the reality of it is that's not happening, so stop the noise on that. Number two, you don't need the distraction. We're focused on winning.
Members of the GOP are calling for Michael Steele to step down after he said the war in Afghanistan was one of President Obama's choosing and suggested it wasn't winnable. But Steele says he's sticking around. All right, we're back to our edgy panel. Michael Quinones from Capital News Connection. Why were Republicans so upset with him?
Well, for a long time, Michael Steele has been just saying a lot of things to criticize the Democrats, seeing whatever thing sticks, especially in advance of the November elections. And when he said what he said, he sounded a lot more like a liberal. A lot of liberals have been criticizing the war, trying to not vote for funding, whereas a lot of Republicans have been agreeing with President Obama, saying, yeah, we need to wage this war, we need to be tough for national security reasons. And then you have Michael Steele criticizing the effort and then actually not being completely factually accurate with it. He's going to get a lot of criticism.
During the news this week, we've heard plenty of Republicans speak against what Michael Steele said, but many of us have forgotten what Steele actually said. So here's what he said about Afghanistan.
This was a war of Obama's choosing. This is not something the United States had actively prosecuted or wanted to engage in.
James Hohmann, Politico, is this going to go away quietly and Steele will stay, or will Steele go away quietly?
Steele will stay until after the midterms, and then he'll go away quietly. The rules of the party are such that it takes a lot to remove him. You need 2/3 of the Republican National Committee members. No one wants a messy situation where you're removing the first African-American chairman of the Republican National Committee during an election year where you hope to do well. But at this point, Steele has really become irrelevant inside Republican circles. Prominent Republicans just don't listen to him. They sort of want him to stay quiet.
Right.
Democrats actually really like when he says stuff like this. They genuinely love the chance to make the party look dysfunctional.
Hey, before we go, I want to talk about Reagan National Airport. That this whole rule about, you know, you can't have flights more than, what is it, 1,250 miles out. It boils down to two things, doesn't it? Manuel, we've got lawmakers who want to fly home out west, nonstop flights, and you've also got competition with BWI and Dulles Airport who don't want to see business taken away either. What is this whole controversy about the National Airport? Well,
and there's also a fact that some airline advocates say that if this happens, if they allow more flights long distance, that we could see lower prices, more competition, and that's something folks don't want to see in the airline industry. Some folks don't want to see.
And what do you bet we don't see? They're not going to give it. Come on, we're not going to see lower flight. More competition, they'll find ways to raise the. But anyway.
But the interesting thing, I think, is going to be a battle of the wills in the Senate. You have some senators saying they want these more long-distance flights. You have Senator Warner, Senator Webb of Virginia, trying to protect constituents who are worried about noise. And each senator has a lot of power in the Senate to try to block this or move this from moving forward.
Well, worried about noise, and it's also competition for Dulles Airport, too.
Exactly.
There's the business factor. Well, we could talk all day about this, but thanks to our edgy panel, we'll see you back next week. You've heard from us, so what do you think? Send us your thoughts and comments on all the week's big stories at our website, federalnewstonight.com.